Turn, if you would, in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 10. We're going to finish up this chapter this week. We're going to take a church history detour next week with Reformation Sunday. No, I'm not going to shave my head like a monk. Not going to do it. Not going to do it. But we're going to have some fun time looking at church history and its relevance for today. But before we get there, end of Matthew chapter 10. If you're using one of the blue chair Bibles, it's on page 815. To spark our thinking this morning, I want to talk about an idea we've talked about before, but the different tensions in the Bible, where we are called to live in ways that can seem at first contradictive. One of the best examples is speaking the truth in love. We are to both speak the truth, but also do so in a loving way. And we get into trouble when we try to only do one of them because that's easier. Today, in the context of Jesus' instructions to the original disciples on their first short-term missions trip, right, Jesus is going to send out the disciples to go preach about him. But in our text today, at the center of it is Jesus saying, I divide people. Jesus is going to talk about having a sword and dividing even families. It seems strange when you're trying to encourage people to go talk about the love that Jesus has for everyone, to include a section on, hey man, I'm like a sword, I divide people. And we don't normally think of Jesus this way. Jesus does want all people to believe in him, so why would he talk about dividing people? And I want us to wrestle with this tension throughout this text, that on the one hand, the world is divided by Jesus. Our world is divided by what you think about Jesus. But on the other hand, this does not mean we need to separate or isolate ourselves from the people that we're called to bring into God's family. But let's be honest, it'd be easier to pick one side. Jesus divides, therefore I will separate and isolate myself from those who reject him. Or, Jesus has called me to these people, therefore I will ignore any division and act just like them. Again, it's easier when we flatten these complexities in the Bible. But what I want you to see this morning, and I want you to wrestle with in your own life, is that at the same time, we are called to follow Jesus and be different from the world around us. But at the same time, having a love for the lost that compels us to go out into a world that oftentimes wants nothing to do with Jesus. And at the end of the passage, we're going to see that while this is a difficult task, the reward is always worth it. So let's look beginning verse 34 to 36. Let's talk about Jesus and his sword. Follow along as I read. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Now, as a part of understanding this passage, I think we need to look at the larger context of the Gospels. And one of the things that Jesus does in the Gospels is correcting people's assumptions about who he should be and what he should do. Again, in the context of the Gospels, he is still mostly ministering to Jews who were expecting a Messiah. We see this in John's account of the feeding of the 5,000, That includes the people wanting to take Jesus by force and making him king. And he had to understand, look, I'm not a king in that way. Even after the resurrection, the disciples asked Jesus, Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? After all, isn't Jesus the Prince of Peace of Isaiah 9:6? About this, one author writes, as many Jews, I need to do a better job of typing, as many Jews in Jesus' day thought the coming of Messiah would bring them political peace and material prosperity, so today many in the church think that Jesus' presence will bring them a kind of tranquility. Jesus says, I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. And it is a sword that can and will divide the closest familial relationships. Son versus daughter, daughter against mother, daughter-in-law versus mother-in-law. Jesus summarizes in verse 36, a person's enemies will be those of his own household. At first, these statements can feel very foreign to the other parts of the Bible. Aren't we supposed to love our families, our neighbors, and even our enemies? Yes. But loving our enemies doesn't mean that there are not real differences between those who follow Jesus and those who do not. Faith in Jesus unites all believers across the world and across history, and faith in Jesus separates us from those who have rejected Jesus. I think we need to come to terms with the fact that what we believe about Jesus is the ultimate divider. It's still fashionable, if not a little less so than it used to be, to talk about how all religions are the same. But this completely breaks down when you come to Jesus. Go to the Middle East and tell a Muslim that Islam and Christianity are exactly the same and see what they think. The most significant difference among many is that Islam does not believe that Jesus is God. To them, he is only a prophet. And you can't trust in Jesus to be saved if he's just another prophet. Similarly, a little closer, let me use Jehovah's Witnesses as an example. They might even refer to themselves as a sect of Christianity. They even have their own Bible. But they do not believe in the divinity of Jesus, and that changes everything. Christianity is unique in that it believes that it is only through faith in Jesus and his sacrificial death on the cross, because he is fully God and fully man, that we can be forgiven of our sins, reconciled to God, and have the hope of eternal life. And while Christianity is completely inclusive in that all who believe in Jesus will be saved, it is entirely exclusive because we believe it is only through trusting in Jesus that we are saved. And this truth can divide neighbors, it can divide friends, and it can even divide families. The ultimate dividing line of this world is not political parties, nor national borders, or even time. The ultimate dividing line of this world is whether or not you have placed your personal trust in Jesus for your salvation, or if you have rejected him. There are not many paths to believe. There are two: those who have received Jesus as Savior and those who have not. I want us to take a little bit of time to think through some of the implications of this truth. If indeed the world is divided into people who follow Jesus and those who don't. Here's a tension that I feel every day. We are separated from the people of this world because of our faith. But remember, this passage is a part of a larger passage of directions of how to go out into the world as witnesses to Jesus, as evangelists. The people we are separated from because of our faith, we are called to love and reach out with the gospel of Jesus. So in our division, we cannot live lives of separateness and isolationism. The sword of Jesus doesn't separate us to isolate us from our unbelieving neighbors and family members. There will always be a temptation to fear and isolate from the people that God has called us to reach out to with the good news of Jesus. And there's also a temptation in every generation to make Jesus more palatable, to make Jesus less controversial, to erase that separation. Both are true. Both might be true of you within the same week. Yeah, you don't have a problem separating from your neighbor who doesn't believe, but are you tempted to make Jesus more palatable to your family member who doesn't believe? And as I interact with the people of our community, there are two truths that cause the most separation and the most controversy. The first one I've already mentioned, that faith in Jesus is the only way to be saved. There's no other way to read the Bible. And secondly, that the Bible is clear about gender and sexuality. We believe that God created us male and female and that it is good. We also believe that sex is a gift from God to a married man and a married woman. And so every day, I need to live, you need to live in such a way that I stand firm in the truth of the Bible and that I love the unbelievers around me so that I serve them as Christ commands and as I have opportunity, share the good news of Jesus Christ with them. Every day you need to feel that tension. If I need to live a distinct life as a follower of Jesus, but my distinct life is lived in relationship with those who do not know Jesus because he has called me to them. And just as he sent out the original disciples in the short-term trip here in Matthew chapter 10, so too every day he sends us out into that world. You need to stand up for the truth and you need to love the lost. And it's not always easy. And sometimes you're not going to know what to do. But don't flatten that problem. Don't say, well, Jesus is a sword, so I can just separate and isolate myself. Friends, we are called into this world. We are sent out with the good news of Jesus while at the same time standing up for the truth. And again, as we get to the end of this passage, doing the difficult work of being a believer who stands for the truth but yet loves his neighbor is always worth it. But before we get there, we need to continue on in verses 37 and 39, where we need to continue to talk about the loss that we can have when we follow Jesus. Let's look at that, verses 37 to 39. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. I want to start by addressing that this is truly difficult language. And I want you to feel it. I want you to feel the weight that these words have. Don't just push it away. But I want to begin with this idea because I think there's a clear, big idea in all of these details. And that's this. Don't let anything prevent you from following Jesus. In all that Jesus says here, the big thing that he's saying is don't let anything get in the way of you following Jesus. And then he gives us 3 categories. Let's look at those in turn. So let's look at verse 37. Jesus uses the category of love to express this idea. Don't love anyone more than Jesus so that you reject Jesus. Church history is full of people who had to make the difficult decision to leave the faith of their families and follow Jesus. Maybe for some of you, that's a part of your story. Even though Jesus uses the category of love here, it does not nullify all of the commands we have to love our families, neighbors, and even our enemies. This is a love of who you are going to follow. Think of it this way: if we care more about the opinion of our family, that we reject Jesus, he will reject us. Again, that phrase is not worthy of me. Now, I would add, as you're trying to wrap your mind around this, that when we follow Jesus and experience the love of Jesus, I would argue we're actually better able to love our families, our friends, and our neighbors, and even our enemies. But I want you to see here, again, using the category of love, Jesus is saying, don't even let those closest to you prevent you from following me. So that's the first category. The second category, Jesus talks about the cross. Look at verse 38. And whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. It's important to note that Jesus said this before the crucifixion, but Matthew wrote it after the crucifixion. So at the time Jesus said it to his original disciples, it still included symbol of pain and suffering. The disciples knew what crucifixion was. But reading it through the lens of Jesus' crucifixion and the disciples looking back on it through Matthew's writing, we can add to that the cross as a symbol of sacrifice. So, when it talks about taking up our cross or not taking up our cross, what Jesus is saying here is don't let the difficulty of pain and sacrifice keep you from following me. Following Jesus is not always easy, but it is always worth it. It's not always easy to follow a Savior with a dividing sword when our culture wants inclusion and conformity. We'll talk a little more about this in the following verses, but for now it's good enough to say that Jesus is warning us against giving up when the going gets tough. If you give up on your faith at the first sight of any difficulty, then you are not worthy of Jesus. It doesn't mean that suffering isn't suffering or that there isn't any difficulty, but difficulty tends to show what you really believe. We see this in our own lives. When we think of trying to change, we might say something like this: you say you want to be healthier, but you refuse to do the hard work of eating better and exercising. Do you really want to be healthier? Similarly, if you want to follow Jesus only when it's easy, do you really want to follow Jesus? Don't give up on Jesus because of hardship. Jesus is always worth it. This moves into the next idea in verse 39. And it's this: don't let the idea of living your life your way prevent you from following Jesus. What is Jesus talking about when he says here, who loses his life for my sake? One of the commentators is helpful on this. He gives this definition of what Jesus is talking about when he's talking about his disciples losing their life. First of all, it could refer to actual martyrdom, which has happened in the history of the church. But also, as he further defines it, as disciplined self-denial. The disciplined self-denial, I think, could be further defined as following Jesus' commands instead of our own feelings and desires. The natural impulse of every human heart is to follow Frank Sinatra and Burger King and to do life my way. That's right, take that, Frank Sinatra, you and Burger King together. Anyway. It is when we die to ourselves and live to follow Christ that we actually find life. If you want the abundant life that Jesus promised in John chapter 10, then you need to die to yourself, die to your pride, and find life in following Jesus. We find this life in that all of God's commands are for our good. Psalm 119 says this, "Turn my eyes from looking at worthless things and give me life in your ways." It feels backwards, but to truly live, we must follow the good commands of God. The other aspect to finding life in our self-denial and following Jesus is the future hope of eternal life. If we submit to Jesus, if we deny ourselves to follow Jesus, then we find eternal life. And if we follow Jesus today, we have the guaranteed hope of eternity with him. Romans 8:18, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us." I can take up my cross today because I know I have a glorious future. Don't let anything prevent you from following Jesus. Let's turn to the last section of our text where we're going to look at the reward of following Jesus in verses 40 and 42. "Whoever receives you receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. The one who receives a prophet because he is a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And the one who receives a righteous person because he is a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. And whoever gives one of these little ones even a cup of cold water because he is a disciple, truly I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward." Hope you're paying attention. I don't know if you caught the main points of these verses of receive and reward. Now, when you see the word receive, insert the idea of hearing and believing. Think back a couple of weeks to earlier in this chapter where Jesus says to his disciples, "And if anyone will not receive you or listen to your words," the person who receives the disciple is the person who hears the good news of Jesus and believes the truth about Jesus. And here Jesus picks up on that idea of receiving, but adds another wrinkle. If a person receives the disciples and their message, they are actually receiving or believing in Jesus. And if you receive Jesus, you are receiving God the Father, him who sent me. Now again, remember, this first trip is going out to Jewish people. The message to the Jews was that the promises God made to them in their Bible were fulfilled in Jesus. And it was especially important to connect Jesus to God the Father for the Jewish audience who already claimed faith in God. And by the way, it also means that the flip side is true. To reject Jesus is to reject God the Father. But then Jesus gives another example of receiving, again in terms that the Jewish audience would be familiar with. Because of the parallel structures here between the sentence about the prophet and about the righteous man, I think it's helpful to think about them as very similar people. The prophet is God's messenger, and the righteous man is a faithful follower of God. If you receive God's messenger as God's messenger, if you receive the godly person because they are a godly person, you will receive their reward. Now, we're not given many details about what this reward specifically is in this context, but I think we're helped by the fact that these are two categories of men who are faithfully following God, and so they experience God's approval and blessing. If you listen to God's word through his messenger, if you listen to the godly person speaking to you, you will experience the reward of God's approval and blessing on your life. This connects to what we saw earlier, that all of our perseverance is worth it because we are promised God's blessing and approval for our faithfulness. Don't let anything prevent you from following Jesus, because when you follow Jesus, God will reward you. This is true if you listen to God's messenger, but it is also true when you serve the least of the kingdom. Look what Jesus says in that last verse, verse 42. And whoever gives even one of these little ones even a cup of cold water because he is a disciple, truly I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward. Little ones here can refer to children, but in this context it may refer to Jesus' disciples who do not have the power and status as prophets or righteous people. But if you do what one author calls the least courtesy commands to the most unimportant person, because he is a disciple, truly I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward. God rewards the smallest acts of service done for his disciples. And the good that we do for the sake of Jesus will receive a reward that can never be taken away. This is one of the reasons we can experience hardship and loss in this world, because God's reward to his faithful people can never be lost. This calls to mind one of my favorite verses, 1 Corinthians 15:58, which says this, "Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. Every act of service is precious to God, and he will reward it. And his reward is greater than any reward on this earth." Matthew 5:12, "Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." In a world divided by the truth of Jesus, a truth that might cause loss and hardship in your life, cling to Jesus, for great is your reward, and that reward will never be lost. A couple thoughts to close up this morning. Number one, the whole world is divided by Jesus. The most important question you need to answer in your life is, who is Jesus? Is he truly the Son of God, the second person of the Trinity? Is faith in him and his sacrificial death on the cross the only way to be saved? We cannot blur the lines between those who follow Jesus and those who have rejected him. But we also need to keep a warm heart towards those who are lost. We need to both stand up for the truth that does separate us without separating ourselves from the people we are sent to share the good news of Jesus with. 2, don't let anything come between you and Jesus. Don't let those closest to you prevent you from following Jesus. Don't let the reality of suffering and hardship and sacrifice prevent you from following Jesus. Don't let your pursuit of life in this world lead you away from Jesus. To lose your life for Jesus is the only way to truly find it. And finally, number 3, the reward of following Jesus is always worth it and can never be taken away. It is only through receiving Jesus by faith and following him that we can be reconciled to God and have the hope of eternal life. The reward of eternal life is forever and can never be taken away. And Jesus rewards every single act, no matter how small. And whoever gives one of these little ones even a cup of cold water because he is a disciple, truly I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you for your word to us this morning, that we would stand firm in the truth that it is only through your Son that we are saved. And that as the disciples were sent out by Jesus with these words, that we would go out into our mission field, into our communities, into our families with the good news of Jesus. And that we would not let anything prevent us from following Jesus. Not those closest to us, not the ideas of hardship and pain, not the pursuit of life in this world, but that we would see that great is the reward of following you, a reward that never disappoints and can never be taken away. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks for watching this video from Hillside Evangelical Free Church. Our hope is that these resources will help you grow as a fully devoted follower of Jesus Christ. We're located in Green Bank, Washington on Whidbey Island, and if you live in the area and are looking for a church home, we'd love to have you join us. You can find out more information at our website at hillside-efc.com.